Okay. Good evening, all. It's 5:30, April 3rd, 2025.
You can't sit in the front row, okay? Because you can't sit next to me.
I mean, do I have to like separate you guys?
Hi, Lori.
Is the podium mic?
Oh, I didn't even recognize you. What the hell? Where'd you come from? Huh?
You just said hi to me when I
I
walked
know, but you look so different with your hair. And you know how I met another friend of yours today, Paul Ostini.
Paula? Oh, yeah.
Paul.
Oh, Paul, yeah.
Yeah, he says he knows you real well.
Yeah.
At a Los
His
Osos.
wife's name is Paula.
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually grew up with them in Burbank. Her parents used to own a famous Italian restaurant in Burbank. You know, it's a small world. So
It's getting
I
an
went
echo.
And did some
There's an echo
work
here.
in
Do you know how to
my
turn it?
rentals in Los Osos. One of my favorite places is the not a steam, you know, the little coffee shop there right on the bay. That whole place. So I see them, Paul and Victor, who used to work for the
Once again, this is the April 3rd, 2025 special meeting between the Public Works Advisory Board and the Harbor Advisory Board to review the inspection and assessment of the revetments and seawalls, final report. Ms. Burlingame, would you please take a roll call and establish quorum?
Here.
Vice Chair Donnelly,
Present.
Chair Hill.
Here.
There is a quorum of the Public Works Advisory Board.
All right, thank you. We'll do a quorum for the Harbor Advisory Board. Mr. Munson, could you please take a roll call vote?
Thank you. Marshall Witkowski,
Present.
Sharice Hansen,
Here.
Cal Myers,
Present.
Jeremiah O'Brien,
Present.
Gene Dowdy. Here. We have a quorum.
At this time, I'd like to call Cindy Cecil, the city engineer, to make her presentation.
There we go. Thank you. Amanda Del Bello with, she's the vice president and senior project manager with Richard Brady and Associates, who prepared the assessment of the revetments and seawalls. And she personally conducted the site visits along with another engineer from their company. And she will be doing our presentation tonight. And if we'd like to ask that we hold questions until at the end of the presentation, some may be answered, you know, further along in the presentations. That would be helpful. And there we are.
Yes, so good evening, everybody. I'm hoping that you guys can see my screen. I have prepared a slideshow on the revetments and seawalls.
Yes, we can hear you and see the slideshow. Thank you.
Excellent. Good. So yeah, we've been working on this project for several months now. We're put together a report that is quite lengthy, and I'm going to do my best to try to convey the information in that report in the next 15 minutes. So the scope of work included visual inspection of the 12 revetments, 3 seawalls, and then we did a survey above and below water. We also did a geophysical exploration that included ground penetrating radar, and then where anomalies were noted, we did exploratory test pits. And then we also did geotechnical assessment, which included visual inspection and also oversight of the findings for the geophysical exploration. And then with all of this information, we put together a condition assessment report, which included prioritized recommendations and a very rough order of magnitude cost estimates. I'm Amanda Del Bello. I've been doing this for 18 years, inspection and condition assessment and rehabilitation of waterfront structures. I'm also a commercial diver and 100-ton master, so I spend a lot of time in the water and on the water. Some background of the seawall and revetments. We understand they were built in 1935. and little to no maintenance has been done since then. There are 3 seawalls in 3 different locations. One is south of the North T Pier underneath the timber wharf. And then the second one is a concrete retaining wall south of the boat launch. And the third one is a timber sheet pile wall, which is behind the inn at Morro Bay. There's also 12 sections of revetment that we inspected, which is just over 6,000 feet, starting at the Morro Bay Rock down to the south end of the Embarcadero. There's 12 sections because in between the sections, there's privately held leaseholds. This is a map of those locations. You can see the revetment 1, 2 on the top, and then seawalls, revetments, revetment 12 down here, seawall 2, seawall 3. Get a close-up of that on the next slide. So this is a slide from the survey that we were able to do. And this one shows revetment 1 on the north side of the rock, revetment 2 is on the south side, and then going down the bay, we have revetment 2, seawall 1, revetment 4, and then revetment 4 through 12, and you can see where the leaseholds are in between. And then at the end of revetment 12, we have seawall 2 south of the boat ramp, and then seawall 3 at the hotel. Some history, Morro Bay Rock used to be an island, and then in 1936 they constructed a causeway to connect to the rock, and then shortly after that the U.S. Navy started using the bay, and during that time significant improvements were made to the bay. So you can see in the historical image to the left the causeway is being constructed, and then on the right you have the breakwaters entrance to the harbor. And then you can see the shoreline has significantly changed where they've built the revetment and then they dredged and filled behind the revetment. And you can see that the north and south T piers are also there. So in our investigation, we use condition assessment ratings. These categories include good, fair, poor, serious, critical. Good is no problems or minor problems noted. Fair is minor to moderate defects. Poor is advanced deterioration. Serious is advanced deterioration, and local failures are possible. And critical is very advanced deterioration, and more widespread failures are possible. So for the seawall inspection, the scope of work included visual inspections, and then we noted defects with photos. So we'll go through some of those here. At seawall 1, the photo on the left, that's above the seawall, and to the left is where the Tognazzini's is, and it's on a timber pile supported wharf. So underneath that picture, you can see the seawall, the picture on the right, the seawall is on the left, and then the timber wharf is over that seawall. The seawall is constructed, what we believe is a concrete wall with tiebacks behind the concrete that you're seeing on top of it. So you can't really inspect the wall here, unfortunately. They added the concrete and then the riprap in front of that. So we did inspect in what we were able to see visually, which is the riprap and the concrete, the shotcrete. And you can see that there are some issues with the shotcrete. There's some subsidence that's you're seeing here. The rocks are likely migrating down the slope, and you're starting to see some cracking here. And then there's also some significant voids. Here, the tape measure is sticking into one of these voids underneath the shotcrete layer. Not in our scope was the timber wharf. However, we did want to bring some areas that we found to your attention. Some significant defects that we just could not ignore. The cap beam over the shotcrete wall was in serious condition with significant deterioration noted. You can see the hammer is sticking in that timber there. And then there were several areas where the piles have degraded. In more than one location, you have 100% section loss of the pile. So seawall 2, this is just south of the boat ramp. It has various failures, and there's also been various, I think, attempts at attempting to retain the soil behind it. On the left photo, it looks like they've added some concrete debris to attempt to fill an area where the wall has failed and fallen in front of the existing wall. And then on the right photo, it looks like they added maybe some masonry blocks behind the wall. That's a close-up of one of the failures that we're seeing, and then the concrete debris placed in the void. And then there's also significant undermining. So the tape measure is sticking in a void underneath the wall. So there's really no foundation support for the wall. Seawall 3 has also seen significant failure. It's a timber sheet pile wall with a tie-back system. And at the bottom of the wall here on the left photo, you can see that there's 100% section loss of the piles and the sheet piles. And the retained soil that is meant to be retained behind the wall is migrating through the wall and creating a little beach in front of the wall. And then behind the wall, there's significant erosion. It doesn't help that there's also a large hill up inland of this, and there's a lot of runoff and a lot of erosion here. And so at this point now, the tiebacks are exposed. So the wall is not functioning as intended at this time. Moving on to the revetments, we did a visual inspection, and then we recorded photos with damage ratings every 100 feet. So for the revetments, we used damage ratings. So every 100 feet is assigned a different damage rating from major to minor. Major is displaced or lost armor stone. That's the protective layer of large rock on top. Or there could be significant voids where its subgrade layer, which is smaller rock, is exposed, or in some case, the soil below that layer is also exposed. There's significant undermining, or the slope is very steep. Moderate defects include some loss of armor stone, some of the armor stone may be falling down the hill, some areas where the subgrade is exposed, and some undermining. And then minor defects, slight movement of the armor stone migrating down the hill. So we'll go there. There was a lot of photos, as you may imagine, but we'll try to highlight some of the typical defects that we saw. And so here are some examples of the major defects that were noted. At revetment 9, this looks like there was a makeshift concrete wall added on top of the riprap revetment. And in this area, there's significant voids and undermining. So the tape measure is underneath this concrete and steel and timber placed on top of the revetment, that now there's a significant void, meaning it's left unsupported. Another major defect example, significant voids found at revetment 3. More void. This one's, I think it went, 6 feet horizontally. And then in some cases, the rock is migrating down the hill, leaving voids vertically. That's seen in this photo. And this void, it's 2 feet high, but extended 15 feet long. Above this is the sidewalk. So in areas of the sidewalk, we're seeing that there's undermining. It's not significant undermining at the sidewalk, but if this continues, then at some point the sidewalk could become undermined. And then major defects observed at revetment 10. Here you can see that there is some undermining happening, and the railing is actually not plumb anymore. It's rotated to the right, and the rocks are migrating down the slope, and some settlement is observed here. Also at revetment 10, the subgrade is exposed, so you can see the soil layer underneath, and there's significant areas where the armor stone is just missing altogether. At revetment 2, this is another example of where the armor stone is missing, and the runoff and subsidence is happening, and then this observation deck is becoming undermined and unsupported. Other areas, revetment 7, where there's large sections of rock missing and the rock appears to be migrating down the slope. This leaves some structures that could be left unsupported. So in this case, there's a ramp here and a pipe and a sidewalk above. I think there's also a structure over here, part of the leasehold, that if this continues to move, you could start seeing movement of the structures. Some moderate defects, a typical condition at revetment 1 and 2, the rock doesn't extend to the top of the slope and is exposed to runoff and erosion. And then at revetment 7, you can see the subgrade exposed, the finer, smaller rock is exposed and the rock is migrating down the slope. And then this one's interesting. This is just south of the South T Pier. I think that improvements have been made here where they made the slope gradual and added a lot of rock. So it looks really nice in this section. And then behind the red line, you can see an area where the slope becomes much steeper and the subgrade is exposed and there's a lot of rock missing or has migrated down the hill. For the survey, we surveyed all the revetments and we used a multi-beam sonar below water and then LiDAR above water to collect the data. This was able to cut us a section, a profile of the revetment every 100 feet. So we can use this section to help identify steepened sections or areas that could be unstable. Minimum slope is recommended to be 1.5 to 1 for a well-constructed revetment. However, 2 to 1 is recommended and commonly used now. 1.5 to 1 is not advised for modern construction. And, in a lot of cases, we are seeing a steepened section that is steeper than 1.5 to 1. So the circle here is showing an area where it's 1.3 to 1. And in the table in the report, you can see that there's several areas where this condition is happening. Then we started doing ground penetrating radar in areas to try to identify subsurface voids. And there is these voids or anomalies were mapped out. And then to try to verify what's going on with these potential voids or anomalies, we did potholing. And so this is the potholing exploration, and luckily we didn't find significant voids in the areas where we identified these anomalies for investigation. So that was good news. So we'll get to the recommendations for the seawalls. Seawall 1 really should have further investigation and some coordination with what could happen with what I understand to be a leasehold of the wharf in front of the seawall. Then seawall 2 and 3 should be replaced in kind or could be changed to a new riprap revetment. For the revetments, every 100 feet that got a damage rating also came with a recommendation of either adding rock, refurbishing the revetment, or rebuilding it. Typical recommendations include trying to control the surface runoff behind the revetments and to try to reduce the erosion occurring at the top of the slope. And then we also recommend further investigation to determine how the revetments were constructed originally so that we can kind of understand how we know that when they were built, it's likely that they didn't include a filter layer, a filter fabric, but they could have done a filter layer of smaller rock gradually to larger rock, which may be sufficient, but we don't know what's there until we uncover it. And our recommendations of adding rock, refurbishing, or rebuilding are really could be justified if we were able to see how they were constructed. So the damage ratings go along with the recommendations. So major defects are recommended to be rebuilt. Moderate defects were recommended to be refurbished, and minor or no defects is add rock or no action. So this is what the refurbished revetment could look like. You would have to deconstruct the existing revetment, so stockpile the existing rocks. Then you would excavate the keyway for replacement of the rock. you smooth the existing subgrade to the desired slope, and then you place a filter fabric layer. On top of this, you place smaller rock, and then you can put the riprap back and new riprap. And then rebuilding is basically the same thing, except you would excavate a larger keyway and place a larger key. And then you'd also include engineered fill. So this was recommended where the slope instability was observed. So with all that information, we put this table together so we can understand kind of the conceptual recommendations assigned to each structure and then their condition. And then with the condition and risk of failure, public safety, or a number of things are considered, and then it is assigned a priority. So the priority repairs should be repaired within 1 year. And then short-term repairs, 2 to 4 years, midterm, 5 to 7, and long-term is 8 to 10. And based on those recommendations, we put together very rough order cost estimates. The cost estimates were for each structure, and then they all include general conditions, mobilization, demob, contractor overhead and profit. There's geotechnical investigations, engineering, compliance, and permitting, and there's also construction engineering support and construction management. Because this is a study level estimate, we recommend that there's a large range. So we put a range of -30 to +50%, and that brings us to between 25 and 55 million. Then I'm open for questions, but I think Cindy wanted to go through some key points for discussion.
It's up to you all if you'd like to have your own questions or if you'd like to address some of the points that we have interest on input.
I have one, I think it's not really here. It wasn't in scope for your study, but the two main seawalls at the harbor entrance, obviously if those fail, the rest of this stuff doesn't matter. Is there any, they have to ask is how do we know those are still in good shape? Breakwater bar.
You're referring to the revetments as you enter?
Yeah,
Yes.
the ones that protect the harbor,
Okay.
not the seawalls. Is there any concern that you have over that in your study that you saw? I know it was outside of your scope.
Yeah, we did not inspect them. However, we did look at historical information, and I did uncover a document that says that the Army Corps is responsible for maintaining them, and there has been a number of maintenance projects done on on those jetties. So I don't know the answer of their condition right now, but work has been done since they were originally built.
All right, thank you.
Jeremiah O'Brien here on the Harbor Advisory Board. I was curious if anybody looked at the revetments along Little Morrow Creek down by the storage facility that the harbor and the Coast Guard use by the walking bridge.
That was not part of this scope, but we in Public Works have had it inspected recently by an outside bridge assessment because we were concerned about the abutments for the pedestrian bridge there, pedestrian emergency bridge, and also the big scour by the storage area. So we're waiting for their advice on what to do with that, and then we are moving forward on protecting that from encroaching. We're right at the edge of the road. The access
Well,
road there.
one bad winter, and that's
One
the
more.
road's gone.
Exactly, yeah. So that's on
We
our
were
radar.
lucky this year.
Yeah. We were holding our breath for sure.
Good evening. My name is Gene Dowdy, architect on the Harbor Advisory Board. I've done a lot of work under rocks, under the docks and slips. Just a comment on your seawall number 1. That is a timber bulkhead behind the Shot Creek, and it's eroding away. I was just down there underneath there this morning. On seawall number 3, the old in Morro Bay, those pilings were put in just to stabilize the parking lot, and they were not treated pilings, they were just telephone poles that were put in. So of course those are going away. But my other question is on your profiles. I didn't see any reference lines. I know that you had mean low water is 0, but I didn't see anything how that ties into either the revetment line or the show control line. And if you go forward, we need to know where we're talking about. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Robert Nava. I'm part of the PWAB, and I have a question I didn't really see addressed in here. How much of the wear and tear on the revetments and seawalls is from natural or, I guess, age, weathering? And has there been any measurable damage or reportable damage from tsunami impacts? And do your design models that you presented, I understand that they're very basic cross sections that probably not specific to here yet, but do they take into account the velocities or the wave energy that could be encountered with tsunamis? I actually walked down there during one that we had a little while back, and it was pretty amazing to see how fast the water was moving.
Amanda, can you address that?
Yes. I think, the seawalls could be 80 to 90 years old. It would be speculation to say what exactly is the damage other than the fact that they are beyond their intended service life of what could be 50 to 70 years before maintenance would be required. So the time is definitely the factor there, as well as some of the things that we're seeing, like the erosion, and sure, the movement of the water on the water side as well. Would the new revetments hold up for new wave damage, anticipated wave damage and water movement? Yes, they would be designed for that.
Is there modeling for tsunami, or is there some kind of safety factor that goes into the design that would handle the impacts of tsunamis?
There is a manual that is followed that uses the fetch and anticipated wave size, and then it could be modeled. A coastal engineering model could be developed to model that scenario. Yes, it could be done.
I had one more question, sorry. Long-term wise, have you any experience with sort of an open-ended permitting process where the city could do maintenance as needed on the revetments, or is any work on the revetments subject to independent, or I should say, specific permitting every time work is done on them as far as environmental goes?
I think that's a really good question, and I don't know if we're at a place where I can give you a definitive answer on that, but certainly we would want to try to get a permit that could extend over multiple years of repairs, because that's what we are anticipating at this time.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Any other questions?
Yep, I have one. So the terms used in the conditions assessment and damage ratings, are those like a standardized industry term that we can use for grant writing and justification, or is there additional studies that would need to support those efforts?
Yes, those are ASCE standards, American Society of Civil Engineering standards.
Thank you.
On one of your slides, you had revetment 9 is not necessarily critical, but it was in a bright red. I'm just, if you can go back to that slide. Just wondering why it was, so that is like The most important. Okay, got it. Now I get it. Serious. Critical is more. Okay. All right, that's it for me.
Thank you. We'll do one more round. There's a bunch of questions there, specifically around funding. I don't know if that's necessarily Amanda's forte. Do you want to get into that? Yeah, no, although I do have one general question, Amanda, I know this is outside your expertise, but, being a home inspector, you get to know how people finance home improvements or repairs. Is there strategies that you've seen that, in your past work that would be applicable to us in Morro Bay here? Again, this is just.
Certain.
Go ahead.
Yeah, certainly we would work with subconsultants like we do now that would be able to look into grant opportunities. That would probably be the first thing to look at. There may be other things that the city could explore, but I know that city's been looking into talking with the Army Corps of Engineers. That could be another path to explore. So yes, I think there are options that need to be considered.
Sure. No secret stashes, pots of gold that you're aware of then,
No.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate that.
We have talked with firms that do specialize in finding grant money for this type of work. So that's probably one of the soonest things that we need to do if we don't have luck with the Army Corps. Chris has done a lot of work to uncover records and has an appointment, I believe, next week to discuss further. When they did the tour last summer, the Army Corps came out with several people and did a tour of the bay, and they brought up that it was unusual for the Army Corps not to maintain something that's usually cradle to grave for facilities that they build, and that they suggested, and this was the Army Corps telling us, that we should look into that. So that's been looked into. So that's, best case is they step back in, but it's not going to happen quickly, but it is being pursued.
Just a logistics question. I'd like to go down the funding discussion. I have a couple comments on that, but also want to be mindful of Amanda's time. Is there any other questions for Amanda? Go ahead.
Yeah, if you don't mind. This is Paul Donnelly with PWAB. And first of all, Amanda's is a really good report. It's very thorough. It's an eye-opener, that's for sure. But the first question is that this upcoming waterfront master plan that we'll be doing, does that address this assessment in any way? Does anybody know?
I'm not involved with that.
I'm not entirely sure, but I know that one of the components of the waterfront master plan update is taking into account sea level rise. And I know just from my previous job that when we were looking at rebuilding the revetments, we did incorporate improvements to address sea level rise. So it might be hand in hand to address that. So I can't say specifically if it will, but I would assume that it would.
Next question I have is that, and in fact, I guess someone already brought this up about the entrance jetties, the north jetty in particular. There's a lot of rock that's been displaced into the harbor. I guess that's property of the United States government, but is there any way that we could salvage some of that rock for our own needs and bring it into these other locations? Has that ever been looked at?
I have no idea about that. That's Army Corps out there. I guess that we could speak to Army Corps, but I have no idea.
And this is kind of a follow-up to what Gene brought up about the tide level, how the mean high tide is determined and measured at each location. I did a survey of some property down there. I guess it's now Kickers. Used to be Otter Rock. Before that was an old machine shop. I surveyed the revetment in there to show where the Army Corps' jurisdiction was. I contacted the field office in Ventura, and they said they just use tide tables to determine what that might be. It's that, to them, that's that simple. I guess that's what we would do now, but of course it changes over time. Revetment number 1 at the beach. Obviously, it really doesn't need much attention right now, but it could use steps to the beach. I mean, to see people crawl over those rocks to get up and down off that beach kind of seems like a liability. So in any way, could we create steps if we do any work with the revetment that would make it accessible to the beach for beachgoers?
That's a good idea. I know it's difficult getting down to that beach area. For this project, though, we're looking more at repair of revetment, so that would probably be outside this project.
Well, what I was thinking is that if you're going to repair and put some rocks in, if you take some rock that have a flat surface and place them nice and level and make steps out of it.
Yeah, that's a good.
You know,
that's
there's
part of
a
that.
sandy slope that goes down right now, and not everybody uses it, but
Yeah.
you see people surfers and whatnot crawl up and down those rocks, and it's
Yeah.
just like, you know, somebody's going to fall into it. It's a liability concern, I'm sure. At revetment number 2, which goes from, I guess, the target rock down to the intake building, there's rocks on Coleman Beach that seem to have been displaced. I can't understand how that had happened. It's such a steep slope. It looks like maybe there's some erosion coming from off the top of the bluff, but some of that rock could be placed back there. But maybe revegetating the slope can hold it all together. I'm just thinking, because some of that is vegetated in there. Maybe the vegetation would be on top of putting the rocks back in. And then at revetment 3, which is the one in front of the harbor department there, it seems to me that maybe we could replace it with a crib wall instead. Years ago, the county put in a crib wall down in Avila Beach back in the early 80s. And you can almost do that no matter what the tide is, because they're precast members. You can excavate your key slope, and then you can place the members in, the stringers in and put it in and build up a wall, and then pave back to that wall. You have a more steeper slope, but then you have more beach below, and then you have your parking lot restored up above, and it's a simple fix, crib wall. It's an idea that I had. Down at revetment number 6, the dock down below, you can walk down to that dock, but the boards are, you know, the waves go by, they're not nailed down. So I don't know what repair the city does on those docks. And another thing, this is another eye-opener kind of thing. Beneath Flying Dutchman, whatever it's called now, there's a basketball hoop attached to one of the pilings. I don't know if anybody's dribbled on the water there, but it's kind of an odd thing to see. And at the bottom of the slope at revetment number 11 by Associated Pacific Divers, there's this just enormous anchor down at the base. Looks like it came from a battleship. Reg probably got it somewhere and put it there. So I don't know if anybody's noticed that. I went out at low tide to look at these things so I could see everything. And I what am I seeing? There's a big anchor down there. And then the seawalls. I mean, you know, it's nearly one under dockside too. I can't imagine how we'd ever get in there to fix that up without almost having to take the wharf and everything off the top. I don't know how you'd ever going to do that. But that's the city's responsibility, that seawall, C number 1?
The portion that's not part of Dockside's lease is, yes, the city. And
How much is it the city's?
I'm
just-
sorry?
How much of the seawall is the city's
It's
responsibility?
shown on the maps. Amanda, I can't remember the,
Yeah, it's not the whole length of the seawall. It's the first northern portion.
and Paul, you have identified an issue that is going to need to be considered, where the piers are tied into the walls, and all of our piers, honestly, well, some repairs have been done on the South T Pier, but the North T Pier for sure needs attention too. So, you know, it likely that they will need to be tied together. This project was specifically revetments and seawalls, and there have been evaluations of the piers separately that have identified the condition of them. But you're exactly right. We can't do, there's portions of that revetment or seawall that we can't do without impacting the pier.
Yeah.
So at least a portion of it, and hopefully, you know, everything that's needed to be done to the pier can be done concurrently.
And I know this is outside this assessment, but the revetments that are the responsibility of the different leaseholders. How are we on getting on top of those and getting those fixed?
That's a Chris question.
So those come up every time when we renew a lease. A lot of times that's when they address the seawall repairs or whenever there's a changeover in who owns that lease. But when we have one of these major redevelopments of a lease site, that's many times that's when the revetment gets addressed. But yeah, it's definitely a problem across the board for both, the public and the lease site areas.
Okay, that's all my questions.
And some of them have been addressed. Some, ideally, when we do our revetment walls, the leaseholder revetments that are adjacent would be able to tag on, because there's efficiencies, of course, in doing it that way. And that's part of the reason for this assessment. It also helps inform the leaseholders of what's going on next to them, which is likely going on at their walls as well. I know Paul Gillen is using this report to inform him.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. You have any other questions, sir? All right. I think Jeremiah, want to go next?
Yeah, I was just wondering, and this might not be the appropriate time, but has the harbor or the city identified the leaseors that might be responsible for some of these repairs? And the reason I ask that is because they'd have to be noticed well in advance, judging by the costs of what we're looking at here, up to 55 million, I think is the number I saw. Then even the smallest of these jobs would probably be beyond what a leaseor or leasee would be justified in paying.
So the leaseholders are not responsible for any of our revetments. I just want to make sure that was clear.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, they're not responsible for ours.
Okay.
And that's a total cost. So across all the revetments and seawalls. So, and as an example, revetment 9 is the most critical. So that's the one that's on my radar as needing attention sooner than later. And that's about of $750,000 for that. And that's the worst that we have of the revetments. There's a whole, they're all spelled out in their costs, but yeah, you're exactly right. None of the leaseholders could handle ours. They'll be doing, probably in the range of, at worst, $700,000 on theirs. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Jeremiah. Any other questions?
No, I'm sorry, all done. Thank you very much, Cindy.
Hi, it's Robert again from the PWAB, and it's just out of view now, but on revetment 1, which is on the beach, there is some rock that is at the outfall from the old power plant that I, at low tide, have actually seen equipment on the beach harvesting from inside of there. Is that a city asset, and are we interested in maintaining that viability of the asset, or is that going to be abandoned? There is rock revetments on either side of that. It's not shown up here.
And I'm sorry, I don't have any information about that, but I can look into it.
From my understanding, that was where the onshore wind was going to come on
Yeah.
shore. Power was going to go through the tunnel back into the power plant.
I think it is still part of the grander Vistra lease site, that outfall.
So they would be responsible for the maintenance of that access point. It's not a city asset, in other words.
That's my understanding, but I can look into that and get back to you.
Thanks.
I have some more philosophical questions about funding, but I also want to be mindful of Amanda's time. Do we have other questions that we have for Amanda at this point? I know, Amanda, you're running the screen. Is it possible to bring up that list of questions that she had? And Amanda, I really do appreciate your time. Again, this is Cal Myers from the Harbor Advisory Board. Any final comments that you'd like to make, or you're more than happy to listen in if you'd like, or you can.
Or yeah, I don't mind sticking around. Here's the key points for discussion that.
Cal, I'd like to have her stick around for public comment too.
Okay, thank you. All right, great idea. Okay, all right, go ahead, Sharice.
Seeing as people have brought up leases and the responsibility of the lessors for these particular areas, there's the seawall 1 and seawall 3. Do we know why it is that the lessors that are on that property are not responsible for those seawalls?
Now, those seawalls are unfortunately our responsibility, the city's responsibility, not those leaseholders.
I know that, like, currently, if you're going to have a leasehold property on the Embarcadero, you need to be responsible for the land as well as the water. So I'm just asking, just for public notification, to understand why those particular lessors were released from the responsibility of their water. Specifically, anyway, I'm not gonna.
In at Morro Bay.
Yeah. Yep.
And I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know for sure.
Jean does.
But I do know that there are some exclusions in leases, and my only thought was that the seawall does go back to that alleyway, but Jean might know more about that than I do.
Yeah, on the end of Morro Bay, the shore control line is in the middle of the parking lot. And so when the Golden Tee originally had the lease site, they gave back the water lease site to the city. So the Golden Tee, or now the Inn, are not responsible for the bulkhead there.
I thought you were referring to over by the North T Pier, but yeah, over at the Inn at Morro Bay, yeah, we retained the water lease site over in that area, and we have an easement to be able to access that area as well. So if we ever do want to redevelop that area, we have the chance, but it seems like there's going to be a lot of work involved if we do ever want to redevelop that dockage there.
All right, thank you, Sharice. My just one comment, and Chris, I kind of prepped you on this one, is that if we look at the original Tidelands grant, you know, they handed the state and eventually to the city the assets, the harbor as built by the Army Corps of Engineers, and associated with that, they also gave a revenue stream, so you could lease those properties. And in that short little statement that's from the 60s, it says that, you know, we're going to give you can lease these things and you can maintain that asset. And so the city over the years has tried to push that financial responsibility to the leasers. But, you know, there's a lot of that money that probably should be spent on maintenance. And if you do the quick back of the napkin, you know, we get $2 million a year, 60 years, today's dollars, you can get to $100 million. And I'm fairly certain $100 million over the last 60 years hasn't been spent on maintenance. And so, you know, again, we're in today's problem, but 40 years from now, it's going to be tomorrow's problem. So just like an HOA, you have a pay dues to do those long-term things. You shouldn't get to when those assets run out or need maintenance to now do a special assessment. And so, you know, kind of, you know, we'll have to go panhandle to get money now, but 40 years from now, should we have to do that? Should we have a trust fund of some sort that the enterprise fund pays for instead of, you know, spending it all on other items that are not related to maintenance? Again, I don't mean to put you on the spot. It's more of a philosophical, rhetorical question, but it is, you know, troubling.
I understand, and there's a lot to unpack there, but I do want to clear up one thing in that there's kind of two sides of the equation when you talk about the transfers to the county and eventually Morro Bay. So there was the old naval amphibious base that was transferred to the county, and what that included was the land, and then also they gave a lot of Quonset huts and different things that were left over, and the intent of that was to build sort of a recreation area for the county in Morro Bay. The state Tidelands grant is something, it doesn't really include assets. It includes the land and the ability to build facilities within that property. So when that land was granted to the county and eventually to the city, it didn't include any of the piers or revetments that that we have in Morro Bay. Where we're kind of trying to figure out in all of this history is if the revetments look like they were most definitely constructed by, the majority of them were constructed by the Department of Defense during World War II. The question is were those, when the government transferred that, when the federal government transferred that to the county and then to the city, did it include the revetments? So far, what we've been able to find is that no, that we haven't found anything that has shown that they did transfer that to the responsibility to the county. So that's what we're trying to follow up with right now. We don't have any smoking gun that says, yes, this is 100% our responsibility. But just going on the fact that the Army Corps of Engineers tends to maintain things that they had built, we have a lot going for us. So I don't want to hang my hat on anything, and it's definitely going to be an uphill climb, especially with you know, the funding situation at the federal level right now. But there's at least a chance that it's definitely worth pursuing, and so we're looking into that right now.
All right, thank you for that. I'm glad I prepped you.
Okay.
Sharice, you had a question?
No.
All right. Let's see, quick look at some of the other. Yeah, I think we've covered everything here, partnership. The Army Corps of Engineers is responsible for the seawalls, it may make some leasers happy. So I think that's it. I don't know. Oh, yes, public comment.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I took over.
Okay. At this point, we can move on to public comment. So if there's any members in the audience would like to speak to this.
I'll just speak to it real quick. Bill Martini, Morro Bay. And it was my understanding, I'm just going to speak on the outfall first off, you brought that up. It was my understanding that the city actually owned the outfall and that they were leasing it to the energy companies. Now, I'm not sure if Vistra is still leasing it from the city, but that was always a lease, you know, I think it was $250,000 a year that the city was getting. So the outfall, there's a good chance that it does belong to the city because it was really a lease site that PG&E constructed, but they actually paid the city to use the outfall. The Inn at Morro Bay, I was going to mention, there is an easement going down there, but the problem with your easement, it didn't include utilities. It also was 8 in the morning till 8 in the evening easement, and they can lock a gate at 8 o'clock at night. So it's kind of a very restricted easement to get through, and it just kind of, when it comes to that water lease side, it's extremely restricted. So those were just, maybe just two of the comments. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Good evening, everyone. I just want to address some of the comments about the Army Corps Engineers. We're fortunate enough in Morro Bay that the Morro Bay Commercial Fishermen's Association, the cable liaison, sends the city delegation every year to Washington, D.C. to lobby the Army Corps Engineers for funding for mainly dredging, but also it affords us the opportunity to meet with the local legislatures that represent California, represent the ports, and the congressional, they don't call it whatever it is, the asks now. You know, we ask every year for money, funding, and this year Mr. Munson attended his first year with us, and then the city manager and I attended her second year and my third. It's a challenge. We're competing with so many other ports and harbors when we ask for money, whether it's dredge money, revetment money, and all these things. So just the progress that's been made this last 6 months, the last 4 months since Mr. Munson's been here, really started digging into this, trying to show who actually is responsible, has been one of the biggest hurdles that we've had. So I really applaud the efforts that's being made by the Harbor Department and and the other executive team and his partners that he's working with, the city manager, and working with our lobbyists back there who are helping us with this. They really are pointing us in a direction that's helpful, and hopefully, it's so competitive, but hopefully there's other funding pots with the Army Corps of Engineers that aren't being tapped for things like this, because most everybody is doing offshore wind, or, you know, we're there with Port of Los Angeles, Port of Oakland, Richmond, I mean, and then Morro Bay. So it's a challenge, but I appreciate that the commercial fishermen send us every year, and hopefully, we'll see some opportunities come back with some funding. So just wanted to share that.
Any other comments? AGP, do we have any people
Hi,
in the
Chair
queue?
Hill. There are no raised hands in the queue.
Thank you. Any further comments or questions from board members?
I do know that the city sent things to Carbajal and to different people at the state and federal level. I'd like to say that the chamber sent a letter as well, and the Embarcadero master leaseholders. So we might be a little Morro Bay, but we have a loud voice. I think we all know that. So if any other groups feel so inclined to advocate for dredging and for funding for Morro Bay Harbor, I think the deadline's pretty soon, so sooner better than later. But thank you.
Thank you. With that, I think we can call for adjournment.
All right, for that, for anybody that's on the call, we'll take a 10-minute break. Let's see, we'll come back at 6:35 and pick up the normally scheduled Harbor Advisory Board. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I think we're finished with this topic.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present. Good evening.